Wes Hampton walked away from the Gaither Vocal Band in 2017 at 42 years old, at the height of his powers, on one of the most watched stages in all of gospel music. And he left without noise. No scandal, no public falling out, no explanation beyond a few carefully chosen words about family. For 6 years, the full story of what drove that decision stayed mostly buried, and more specifically, what Bill Gaither said to him privately on the day he delivered the news never came out in full. What Wes has since shared about that conversation is the part of the story the gospel music community needed to hear, and what it reveals about who Bill Gaither really is when no camera is running is something fans have waited a long time to understand. Wesley Hampton didn't reach the Gaither Vocal Band through the usual doors of Southern gospel. The convention circuit didn't know his name coming in, and he hadn't spent years building a reputation the way Guy Penrod or Michael English had before joining. What he carried instead was a background rooted in Christian worship and ministry, and a tenor voice that reportedly stopped the room the first time Bill Gaither heard it. That story has traveled through gospel music circles for years because it rings true to anyone who has spent real time with Hampton's recordings. The voice holds something beyond training and technique. It carries surrender, and Gaither, who has spent close to 6 decades building the Gaither Homecoming family of artists, understood that quality the moment it reached him. When Wes joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 2005, the group had already moved through some of the most respected names in contemporary Christian music, Russ Taff, Michael English, and Guy Penrod among them. That legacy would have buried a lesser talent, but Hampton settled in as though he had always held that seat. His blend with David Phelps on high tenor harmonies became one of the defining sounds of the vocal band's middle era, and when he stepped forward on songs like "I've Just Seen Jesus" at homecoming events in Charlotte, Alexandria, and the Kennedy Center, the line between performing and ministering was visible on his face. For millions of people who came to those Gaither Homecoming videos at the end of exhausting days, who let them play softly while cooking dinner, or sat with them in the room of an aging parent who needed something familiar and true, Hampton wasn't simply a hired voice, he was a trusted presence. And that kind of bond between an artist and an audience builds slowly across consistent years of sincerity. By 2017, Hampton had built that bond fully, which is why the news that he was stepping away landed closer to grief than surprise. The announcement carried no drama with it, no controversy, no visible conflict, nothing anyone could point to as the cause. He said he was leaving to be home with his wife Kelly and their children, and the words were simple and clear. But the Southern gospel community, made up of people who care deeply and pay close attention, heard that simplicity and wondered what sat behind it. The silence that followed the announcement deepened those questions rather than answering them. What fans didn't fully understand then, and what Hampton has since described with a transparency that is genuinely rare in Christian music, is how much that decision cost him from the inside. He wasn't leaving something he had outgrown. He was pulling himself away from something he loved deeply because something else needed him in a way the road couldn't accommodate. Kelly and the children had structured their lives around tour dates, homecoming tapings, and recording sessions. And Wes had reached the point where he could look at that picture honestly and name what it was taking from all of them. Not because the ministry wasn't real, but because his family was equally real and equally deserving of his full presence. That willingness to name the actual cost without softening it is a large part of why Hampton holds the trust he holds among the people who follow his work. The decision didn't arrive quickly. Wes sat with it through long seasons of prayer and he and Kelly worked through it in conversations that left him emptied in the way only the most honest conversations do. Leaving the Gaither Vocal Band, leaving that platform and that family, wasn't a small thing, and he carried the full weight of it. One detail gets lost in most retellings, and it shifts the shape of everything. When Wes finally sat down with Bill and told him the truth, that he needed to go home, the setting was private. No tour date, no taping, no audience of any kind. Just two men in a room and Hampton telling someone he deeply respected that he was walking away. What happened next is what Wes has opened up about in ways that have moved people to tears. And this is where the story goes somewhere nobody in his circle expected. Most people assumed there had been at least some awkwardness in that room, maybe a careful exchange between two men managing a difficult transition with strained professionalism. What Hampton has actually described sounds nothing like that. Bill Gaither looked at him with what Wes called complete understanding and told him, in words that have stayed with him since, that family comes first. He acknowledged that the Gaither Vocal Band would continue, that the Gaither Homecoming ministry would go on, but that his children would only be young once, and Bill released him from every obligation, not with the manner of someone handling a personnel situation, but with what Wes described as genuine fatherly warmth. That description of Gaither, the private version, the one with no camera running and no audience to perform for, is something Hampton has reflected on at length since leaving. The man who built a ministry around the idea that the family of God is the most real family has apparently lived that value in the moments that never make it onto a homecoming recording. For Wes, that conversation carried weight that extended well beyond permission to leave. Bill's words functioned as confirmation, as a voice from someone he respected, telling him that the choice he was making was the right one. And coming from someone who has poured decades into gospel and contemporary Christian music, that affirmation settled something in Hampton that had needed settling for a long time. Since leaving the vocal band, Wes has stayed connected to the Gaither Homecoming world in ways that reflect the health of what he and Bill preserved that day. Guest appearances at homecoming events have continued, friendships with fellow artists have held, and David Phelps, who shared that stage with Hampton through years of the group's most beloved recordings, has spoken of him with genuine warmth. The relationship between Wes Hampton and the Gaither family didn't end when he walked off that stage. It changed form, and the fact that it changed form rather than breaking apart is the testimony of how two people handled a hard moment with integrity. Hampton has spoken openly about what coming home gave back to him. Mornings with his children, seasons of their growing up that he had been missing, and the experience of being a husband in a full and present way, rather than a man perpetually in transit. He doesn't frame any of that as compensation for a loss. He frames it as a calling, different from the one that put him on the homecoming stage, but a calling just the same. The God of Southern Gospel who called him to sing before thousands is the same God who called him home to Kelly and the kids, and both of those calls were real, and both of them mattered. Bill Gaither has guided more beloved artists through difficult exits than perhaps anyone else in the history of gospel music. Michael English's departure in the early 90s landed as one of the most painful chapters the Gaither ministry ever had to absorb, and Guy Penrod, walking away in 2008, unsettled a full generation of homecoming fans who had built their understanding of the vocal band largely around his presence. Each of those moments forced Gaither to answer the question, of what the ministry was actually built for. And what Wes's account confirms is that Bill had arrived at an answer that wasn't theological in the abstract sense. It was pastoral in the most practical sense. When a man he had invested in came to him and said he needed to go home, Gaither didn't reach for the language of obligation. He reached for the language of a father releasing a son. And in doing that, he modeled something the gospel music community could stand to carry forward. That the most powerful thing a leader sometimes does is let go of someone they value. Let go with genuine love and trust that faith will handle what comes next. Wes Hampton at 47 is a different man from the one who first stepped onto that homecoming stage at 32. And the difference reads as growth rather than wear. The voice has stayed, and the depth that gathered around it in the years since leaving the vocal band gives it a quality that wasn't there before. Whatever comes next for Wes and Kelly and their family, the people who have followed this journey through 2 decades of Gaither Homecoming recordings already know one thing: his story isn't finished. And if the way this chapter was handled is any guide, whatever comes next will carry the same grace that has marked the whole of it.